Welcome back. Today we're going to be finishing up putting the 428 back together, and this is all the fancy stuff that makes it look pretty. It turns an engine from a long block into a dressed engine that actually runs and drives. So like intake manifold, oil pan, valve covers, carburetor, that kind of stuff, and distributor too. So follow along as we get this into 428 ready to be a running engine. Well, I got the timing chain cover. I found one that was pretty clean, so I just cleaned it up a little bit more. Cleaned the timing cover bolts and the oil pan bolts. Cleaned and painted the pointer to match the rest of the engine. Cleaned an oil filter adapter and stuck on this nice shiny chrome oil pan that I had lying around. It came free with another motor I got. And then I noticed this, which is kind of annoying. Is that there's a freeze plug in the dipstick hole, and I'm thinking, why would my machine shop put one freeze plug in that? And then I forgot that this was an irrigation pump engine originally. And it had a big giant like medium duty truck 7-quart or 8-quart pan on it for the irrigation pump, and that one had a dipstick in the side of the pan. It was like right in the side of the pan. So I'm probably gonna have to take the oil pan off and knock that out if I want to have a dipstick. Little things like this can really annoy you, and when you're building an engine, when you got to go backwards. So, but I have another oil pan gasket over here. It's on the cork one on the shelf, so it's a single piece like this one is too. Nerds. Now, people sometimes say that you cannot reuse a flat tappet camshaft. I am here to tell you that is absolutely wrong. Wrong. You can. But there's something you have to really do in order to do that, and I'll show you how you do it. It's really simple. If you have this great flat tappet cam, you like it, and you want to put it in another motor, the thing you got to do when you take everything out, especially the lifters, is this. Watch this. Okay, so I'm working on my 428, like I said before, and I put a cam in it. It's a milling performance cam, and I wanted to reuse it because I didn't feel like spending another $500 for a camshaft from Comp or somebody. So when I took the cam out of the 390 that I was in, I did this. I put it in a lifter box, all the lifters, and see how it says front, passenger side, rear, and driver's side. That means the lifters are in this box in the orientation that came out of the engine. That's right. That's how you do it. Now, it's got about 2 hours of runtime on that engine. So what I'm going to do, I'm still going to do a brake cam break in, but I'm going to put Isky Revlube on the lifters, just like I would if it was a brand new camshaft. And I'm going to break in the engine anyways because it's got rings and bearings that you want to break in. So I'm going to start pulling the lifter out one at a time, put it in the proper hole like that, and then we'll be sure that the cam lobe is getting the lifter that it was broken in on. That's how you reuse a flat tappet camshaft. Simple. Just have to be mindful. I've seen people use like egg cartons. I've actually done before, is I've used Ziploc bags and I mark each and every lifter. So each lifter has its own Ziploc bag and the lifter is marked. So number one intake, number one exhaust, so forth and so on and so forth. That's how you do it. I used some of the assembly lube on the lifter boards because they're pretty dry. You want to have a little bit of a lubrication on them. Sometimes I just use oil, but I got the assembly lube in there, and then I put Isky's Rev Lube on the bottom of the lifters and all of them. So moving on, it's time to put the intake in, but I got to put the lifter valley gasket. Well, not the lifter, it's a valley pan. That's what it is. Okay, now the lifter valley's pan ends are in. These, I really don't know what these do. I guess it's a splash shield, a heat shield, whatever. But all the FE engines I've ever worked on had them. They just kind of snap in place once the head gaskets kind of hold them there with these tabs here. See the little bitty tabs here, and they just kind of snap in place. And make sure it's clean. Make sure there's no debris on it or any kind of abrasive material that might be on it from the old engine. So give them a good washing before you snap them in. And then now is the intake manifold. Well, I broke down and I bought this. This is a Summit Racing's intake manifold. It's a high-rise dual plane. This is the part number. It's essentially the same design as a Edelbrock RPM. High-rise, square bore intake for a Holly, or you're going to run your auto leaker on there. And I have two intakes, 4-barrel intakes for FEs. One's the original 352 4-barrel intake that was on the 352 that came in my 64 Galaxie, and the other was a 428 Cobra Jet intake. Now I took that in to get cleaned, but the exhaust crossover on the bottom of it, right? This one doesn't even have one, which is cool. No heat, no exhaust to heat crossover to heat up the bottom of the intake manifold. Well, it's common. They took the heat shield off to clean it, make sure there was no debris or anything in the underneath the heat shield, and it had a big crack, like right here where the exhaust crossover is, and underneath the intake manifold. And I had two choices: buy another intake, or three choices: buy another intake, which I did, or put the 352 low-rise intake manifold back on it and hope it's not cracked, or fill the exhaust crossover with hard block. Now, have you ever seen this? The Machine Shop gave me this old bottle. You can see it's been sitting on the shelf for a while. What is this stuff? It's basically concrete is what it is. The old school days, when you wanted to make your lower end of your block stronger, say like your 350 block, you wanted to stroke the snot out of a 350 block, and you put a 4-inch crank in it, but in order to get your clearance for your rods as you're milling it, you got into the water jackets. That's not good. So you fill the water jackets with this stuff, and you fill it all the way up to the bottom of the freeze plugs, and it would basically strengthen the lower half of your engine block, and you get another 100 horsepower out of your block or so. That was an old school way of doing it. If you had an old 400, that was the way to do it. It's old school racer stuff. I decided not to do that. I'm gonna give this back to the machine shop since I'm not gonna use it on this, and go ahead and use this nice shiny new intake manifold. I was gonna get an Edelbrock, but dang. Have you seen the prices of intake manifolds for FE engines? Darn it, those are expensive. First thing I do with intake gaskets is I set them on dry before I get out the RTV and goop them all up. And I want to see what's going on, see how they fit. You see on the Ford FEs, they got these little tab doohickeys that fit over the head gasket, and they got to go behind the little tabs on the valley pan. So yeah, that looks about right. They're not blocking anything. That's a water passage or exhaust crossover, excuse me. That's an exhaust crossover. That is a it's the water jacket, and on the other side is the same thing. So I got the intake gaskets glued to the cylinder heads, see, and I just put a thin bead around the water ports, and I went around the intake ports too. I don't know how well these intake gaskets seal. I'm not a Ford expert by any sense at all. But before you put, goop all the stuff on the ends and down the sides, down the rails, you kind of want to know, how does the intake fit on the heads? And I mean, especially if your block's been decked, all right? Now this one really hasn't been decked. I mean, it was cleaned up, but not. There was like less than a few thousands taken off of the block. So let's put the intake on and see what we get. Okay, it's sitting on there, right? And the valve cover rail is about even. Yeah, pushing down a little bit, but that is a pretty good gap. Now it'll go down a little bit. Push down on it. It'll go down a little bit when you cinch down the bolts. But that's a pretty good sized gap there. And you want to have enough RTV to fill that gap. You don't want a little tiny bead in there and put it on, and the next thing you know, you have oil gushing out because you didn't put enough RTV back there. If you're one of those people that uses end rails, you must be from the Stone Age. I know every single engine gasket kit and intake gasket kit comes with them these days, but let me just tell you something, nobody's used them in years. So it kind of gives me an idea of how much RTV I got to use on the end rails, which is, it's quite a bit. So what I'm going to probably end up doing is putting a bead on the rail of the engine and then on the intake manifold itself as well. And that way the two meet, they squish together and they squish out. Because it's about 1/4 of an inch. That's a pretty good sized gap. Some fit better than others. Okay, so once I started, I didn't want to stop. I put a bead on the China rail. I did a little thinner bead on the intake manifold while I was upside down on the chair. And same with the front. Then I put the bolts in. Make sure you have your bolts ready to go, okay? If you're looking for a torque spec for 3/8 intake bolts on a Ford or a Chevy, it's like do 1 round of 15, then go back and do 2 rounds of 25 pounds. That's enough. On a Ford small block, it's usually, because those are 5/16 bolts, 10 and then 20. There's no real point in going any higher than 20 on a 5/16 bolt. Well, I couldn't wait. So after the intake, I put the carb on. It's a Holly 750. The valve covers, which I may or may not reuse, they need a lot of polishing to look good. And the air cleaner, which is a Fend Cal custom deal. Everything still needs a lot of dirt, a lot of more assembly, a lot more cleaning, but it's starting to look like a motor again. I'm getting my hand out of that camera. Okay, so I took the valve covers back off in order to polish them a little bit. Remember, these came off of a car I found in the junkyard. They're not perfect by any sense. They look pretty good on camera, but they got scratches. Like, see, there's like scratches. There's a fin missing, a chipped fin here, and so there's a couple little dings and stuff. But for junkyard finds, I mean, they're pretty good. They need a little final cleaning later on, but now I'm going to move on to putting in the distributor, and I'm going to upgrade it from the points. Oh yeah, I did add the heater hose fitting. This is the fitting for the temperature gauge, and I'm not going to use this vacuum plug. There's plenty on the carburetor. This car doesn't have power brakes or anything like that, so it doesn't need that. Okay, I lied. I did put the distributor in. I started messing around with the tank here. This is originally off the 64 Galaxie 352. It was painted black and covered in grease. I cleaned it up before and had it pressure tested a long time ago, and now I just decided I'd polish it. And all I did with this, after taking the paint off, was 2000 grit sandpaper and sanded it. 2000 grit when using some water or Windex. I just use Windex or a spray bottle with water, and then I put a polishing wheel on a drill. That's all I did, and I didn't spend a lot of time making it super bright and shiny, but I ended up painting. You can see down there I got the down tube polished up a little bit, got all the paint off of that, and then I repainted the bracket. Looks pretty good. I got the ignition in and converted it to Pertronics. And new plug wires. These are MSD Street Fire 8mm. These are the cut to fit ones. That way I get them exactly the way I want. I hate pre-cut wires because one is always too long, one's always too short. Then you gotta route them, you gotta mix and match, and blah. I hate that stuff. So, I need to do the water pump, harmonic balancer, and accessory drive, and of course I gotta connect the two wires to the coil. And I gotta figure out which water pump to use because I got two, and one's for the accessory to. One is for the 64 Galaxie's original 352, and one is for this 428. Now, they're different, slightly different, and I'll have to show you that in a minute. Okay, so I started with this pile of parts to come up with the accessory drive for the 428. This is what I'm going to go with. Some of this I know was on the 428 when it was an irrigation pump engine. Like these double pulleys here and here, the crank pulley and the water pump. It had this double pulley alternator on it, but this is external regulated, which I don't want to use. I got this chrome GM style one wire internal regulator. One. And it took me a while to figure out which pieces were which because I threw them all in one tub. And I know that piece there and one of these pieces over here, these curved pieces over here, were for the 352. The 352's original balancer was also the harmonic balancer was also a pulley, so it had a pulley built on as part of the balancer. It wasn't a bolt-on deal. So, and the 352 used a slightly different water pump. They are slightly different. And I'll show you on the 428s. That's an old 428 water pump. It was seized up when I first got it out. Now it's kind of rotating okay, but I'm not going to use that. So this is the new water pump. Let me grab the I'm kicking over parts. Okay. Alright. At first glance, they look kind of the same, don't they? Well, I'll get my finger out of the camera. So at first glance, they look kind of the same, except for if you look right here, this is a stud that locates a bracket for the alternator. And anything later, I think 66 and later or 65 and later, use this kind of water pump where there's a bolt hole here instead of a stud here. Pretty much the water pump's identical otherwise. You go to a parts store and you want to buy, hey, I got a 64 Galaxie with a 352 or 390, and you buy this one. It's a $120 water pump. This one's got a lifetime warranty in 65. This is like, I ordered this one for like a 69 or 70 Ford F100 with a 390. And that's basically what's on the engine right now. I'm trying to find a 428 application at an auto parts store is a pain in the butt. So I use this one here, which is the same as the one that's on the engine right now, which I'm just using for mock-up. And in the process, it started rotating, but I'm sure it's probably still a good water pump. It only had 200 hours on it when the engine was pulled off the run stand. But I'm not going to trust it for this engine. I spent a lot of money on it. So I'm going to continue. I'm going to clean up the rest of these pulleys. I'm going to clean that one and repaint it. Probably that one looks okay. I might reshoot this one and this one here. I don't know. I might just clean them up with spray detailer. They'll probably clean up. I got better bolts coming. I got to go find the fan. Right now I got to go back over to the storage unit, find the fan, and throw this pile that I'm not using back in the storage tub. Okay, she is fully assembled. This is what it's going to look like when it's in the car. On the run stand, when I test it, I'm going to use different manifolds. The run stand needs a different style of manifold. They dump out differently. But pretty happy with her. Looked pretty good in a black engine compartment with a little bit of gold and chrome and some black accents. Okay, now that we have our 428, it's all back together. Can you see? Oh, can you see it there? Oh, there it is. Now it's all a whole engine together. Now we got to get it on a run stand. I'm going to do an extra step. I'm going to put it on a run stand. Yeah, I'm not going to put it right back in the car. This way, if I ever have a problem, if the oil pan leaks or whatever, I can fix it so much easier on a run stand than I can in the car. So, and as also, if there's an actual problem internally with an engine, I don't have to pull the whole engine back out of the car. So it is an extra step. It takes a lot more time, but I think it's worth it. As bad luck as I've had with Ford FE engines, I think I'm going to do this. So follow along for the next step as we get the engine on the run stand and see if it actually makes fire and see if all my work assembling an engine actually worked.